Welcome back to the Double Leg. I'm one half of your host, Hey Jive Picks. Welcoming in the other half, the Parlay. We're going to be talking some UFC and MMA news in this one. And at the end, we're going to be giving our prediction for the Santiago Ponzinibbio and Alex Morono fight that just got scheduled yesterday. And we couldn't get that into the predictions video for UFC 282. If you haven't checked that out, go check that out. If you're interested in the full card breakdown, we break down every fight in that video and give our predictions, our active bets, all that good stuff. But the big news today, starting with the Ariel Helwani, Dana White, Paddy Pimblett drama. So basically, if you're uninformed or if you want a little bit more information, Paddy Pimblett had Dana White on his podcast, yesterday or dropped today? I think it dropped today. I went ahead and watched it all like 40 minutes after it dropped. And during that, Paddy Pimblett was kind of back talking or trash talking Ariel Helwani. And everybody knows Dana White and Ariel Helwani do not get along. So it seemed like it was kind of a brown-nosing scenario, if you will, where Paddy Pimblett's trying to get some good, good money with Dana White and get some brownie points there. So once he gets his new contract, maybe he gets a little extra for talking trash about Ariel Helwani. And then maybe 2 or 3 hours later, Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour goes over the entire accusations that were proclaimed in Paddy Pimblett's podcast and pulls up a bunch of receipts, even a voice text that Paddy sent to him. So if you're skeptical about a receipt, if a digital copy is not good enough for you or whatever, a voice memo was played of Paddy Pimblett talking to Ariel Helwani. The beef that Paddy had with Ariel Helwani is that he profits off of the fighters and doesn't, pay them anything. Paddy's wanted to get paid for interviews because he has other paid interviews. That's not what Ariel Helwani does, apparently. And, Dana White's going to agree with that because he hates him. But Ariel Helwani basically said Paddy reached out to him before he was trying to get an interview. And then it was the first time anyone had ever insinuated getting payment for an interview. And it just kind of shocked Ariel Helwani. And most of the communication was between Ariel and Paddy's manager, Graham. And so it wasn't a ton of beef between Paddy and Ariel, but I think he just kind of used the leverage that he had against Ariel Helwani to get some kind of brownie points. But either way, there's always two sides of the story. And to me, it's like if you're going to make claims, which, Paddy and Dana White make claims in the video, basically trashing Ariel Helwani, and they don't provide much proof. And then Ariel Helwani goes ahead and provides a ton of proof, basically debunking everything he said. So if you're going to go on who provides the most information, Ariel Helwani won that one. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, with Dana White, I think Ariel Helwani was the first guy who really pushed back or would challenge Dana White with questions in the media back in the day when the UFC was really starting to gain some traction. And Dana White, I think, hated that. Dana White in the podcast with Paddy kept talking about, Ariel's got this massive ego and his ego gets hurt and all this. But, I mean, I know, everybody knows that Dana White's got one of the biggest egos as well. And I think that's where this whole thing stems from. I don't think Dana necessarily liked the way that Ariel Helwani back in the day was reporting on the UFC. They've had documented conflicts and beefs. And so Dana just, when he hates somebody, he holds a grudge. I mean, you see it all the time when he's talking about people, Bob Arum. There's a list of guys that Dana White can't stand, and Ariel Helwani is at the forefront of that list. And so, Paddy just jumping in there, kind of fueling the fire. I mean, he just kept, kind of poking at him like, yeah, here, we're on the same side here. Let's bond over this. I'm going to get in the good graces of Dana White by bashing Ariel Helwani. And, I don't have anything against Ariel. I think he's really good at what he does. I think if it weren't for Ariel, early on in the UFC wouldn't have gained as much popularity earlier because Ariel was putting stuff out every single day, and he was reporting every single fact of the UFC. So I don't know. I think on Paddy's end, I really do think it was, hey, I'm sitting in front of the boss. I've got a little issue with Ariel, and so I'm going to bond with him over this, and I'm going to try to get in his good graces over, at the expense or at the cost of Ariel Helwani. And I don't know. I think Ariel, though, I mean, showing the receipts from Paddy, all that stuff, Ariel's just, I guess, kind of backing himself up, standing up for himself. And he didn't used to always do that when people would come from him. But now he's not with ESPN anymore. He's not associated with the UFC. He's kind of his own entity. And you kind of see him pushing back at these people now that are, like the Dana Whites of the world. So I don't know. Interesting stuff. I don't know. I was surprised that Dana White and Paddy sat down on a podcast fight week. I didn't really see that one coming. Pretty cool. Definitely enjoyable to watch, but didn't see it coming for sure.
Yeah. And my outlook on it is basically like, I don't have anything against Ariel Helwani. I enjoy his stuff. I think he's really good at covering everything he does. He's very consistently gets, the top athletes in the UFC, the people that people want to see on his show. And I like Dana White. I respect everything he's done. Obviously built the UFC. So the reason we're sitting here. But just overall as a person, he's pretty works very hard. He says what he wants to, he doesn't hold anything back. I always respect that of him. But the way I look at it is like Dana White and Paddy Pimblett, they don't need Ariel Helwani, right? Like without Ariel Helwani, at least at this point, like they can deal without him. But Ariel Helwani needs Paddy Pimblett, or needs, UFC athletes. He needs Dana White. He needs the UFC to make his career. So why would Ariel Helwani want to burn bridges with, good UFC fighters or any kind of UFC fighters? Like he's going to do everything in his power to build good relationships with them. And I think he does a really good job with that. That's why he's very successful. And on the other side, it's like if Ariel Helwani goes away, they're not going to lose anything. So the incentive for Ariel Helwani is to build good relationships and be a good person to these fighters, and for these fighters to, back or trash talk him or talk down about him. It's like it makes more sense that they would do it. They would be the bad guy instead of Ariel Helwani in these situations, because they have less to lose. So it's like, who cares? Screw this guy. But that's just the way I look at it. Like as far as who to trust, or two sides of each story, who has more to lose? Well, the guy that needs the other person. So it's like he has to be nicer to these guys, have better relationships with them. Obviously, in the video, Ariel Helwani had shown multiple text messages between him and Paddy, where he's trying to get a relationship back after that interview fell out because he didn't want to pay him. He reached out to him after his friend passed away and got that win at UFC London or whatever. So he's trying to build that relationship back, and then Paddy was basically like, nah, like fuck you, like I'm gonna side with a guy that does not like you. So interesting. But anything else you want to add to that?
I don't know if I don't know. Coming back to the ego thing with Ariel too, I kind of do agree with Dana that, from what he's built in the MMA community and through the UFC and interviewing fighters, I think he does have a little bit of an ego. So when he gets attacked like that, I think now you're starting to see him, bark back a little bit.
Yeah.
And like you said, though, you don't want to burn bridges, especially with a guy like Paddy, because Paddy's on the verge of becoming the most or the biggest star in the UFC, but the most sought after guy to get on your show, the
Right.
guy that you want on your podcast, or the guy you want to get sound bites from and interviews the most. And I think Ariel has a big enough audience that if he were to keep a good relationship with Paddy, then he'd have some big opportunities to make really good content and get a lot of views and bring in some money off guys like him. But the thing you don't want to see with Ariel is, burning a bridge with Paddy, and then, okay, other fighters saying, well, I'm not going to go on that show. I don't want, this public beef with Ariel. Like, is that going to happen if I go on this show? Like, what's the deal? So yeah, I don't know. I think at some point Ariel, I guess my point is the guys like Paddy are the guys you don't want to burn bridges with, because they're the one that the camera's on. They're the one that everybody wants to see. And if you're Ariel, you got to keep those guys coming on your show.
Yeah, and he showed in the video he had Paddy on in like 2019 before he was even in the UFC. So obviously had a good relationship with him before, and
Yeah.
I don't know where it's at now. He's trying to, or at least tried to, rebuild that bridge after that, payment thing. But from what I've seen on like Twitter and everything, all the fighters are backing Ariel Helwani, which I guess somewhat makes sense because Ariel is a big talker about like fighter pay and everything. So it'd be incentivized for the fighters to side with him.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Dana White is the boss, but at the same time, if you want more money, you might want to side with the guy that's advocating for that. But
Yeah, exactly.
the next UFC news and I guess sports betting news, MMA news in general, James Krause under investigation for the suspicious betting activity, as well as some other people, Derek Minner in there somewhere, for the November 5th fight between Derek Minner and Shailen Nurdembeke. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've heard a little bit about it, but what do you think about it? Because we've talked about it a little bit before this. Some pretty wild stuff. I will say we have seen this a little bit in the past. There was that one fight in South Korea where the guy got a bribe to throw the fight, and then the line moved away from him, and so he was a big underdog. And because everyone was betting on the other guy, saying that because the underdog got the bribe, and then ultimately the underdog won the fight and had a change of heart about throwing the fight. So he got 10 months in prison. So obviously there could be some big charges filed here, but nothing as of now. What do you think about it?
Dude, this is good stuff. I can't. These, like, the day of social media and the internet, stuff like this has probably gone on forever in sports, but you're just now, you can't really get away with it nowadays because of how fast news spreads. It's like wildfire. But first, I guess I'll start with, I don't think the UFC is rigging fights. I don't think they would rig fights. I think they have way too much to lose. They are still a new sport, and they're a new company in the grand scheme of things. So they have way more to lose than they do to gain from rigging fights. I do think, though, having guys like James Krause, betting on his fighters, especially his fighters. I know he used to bet on every single fight on every single card before the UFC, disallowed any fighters and coaches from betting. But betting on your own fighters is sketchy in its own right. I don't know. I can't really get behind that.
Fair.
Just because, I mean, the emotions that are attached to that. Like, let's say you bet a lot of money on your fighter to win, and your fighter's starting to lose. How do you coach your fighter going forward with that in the back of your mind?
Right.
I just think it's super sketchy, and I think James Krause probably was doing a little bit of sketchy shit, because you saw how easily he admitted to Ariel Helwani back in April or March. I bet on every single fight in the UFC, and he said, I'll bet on the fighters that I'm coaching. He admitted that. Yeah. No problem at all, almost as if he didn't see anything wrong with it. But I mean, you don't see NBA coaches, at least anyone's knowledge, betting on their team, or NFL coaches placing big bets on their team. The only time we've really seen is like Floyd Mayweather betting on himself, which was a little bit different. But still, it's a little bit sketchy. And like I said, I don't think the UFC is rigging fights. I think that's a terrible look for the UFC, especially with the sports book in Ontario that is not allowing any UFC bets to be placed on their book. They've taken it completely off the map. That's not good. And, the UFC is attached to DraftKings, and, they have all these sports betting sponsorships. So, yeah, it's not a good look for the UFC. Definitely not a good look for James Krause. I don't know. It's crazy stuff. I think we're going to start seeing these stories come out more in sports, with sports betting getting so popular and starting to be legalized across all states. But man, the balls to bet on your own fighter and be pretty upfront and honest about it. It was kind of shocking to me, I guess.
Yeah. And I just saw today they weren't allowing James Krause at his own event, his own fighting event, James Krause FAC 17, I believe. So it has his name in the title of the event, and he's not allowed there. So that's pretty wild. But going back to betting on your fighters, we've seen multiple times, like, James Krause just start to go off on his fighter in the octagon, and like just going back and thinking like probably had money on this guy to win. And he gives some really good pep talks, in between rounds. So maybe that makes him a better coach. More can fire his fighter up a little bit more. But another thing that I don't see a ton of people talking about, but I have looked at it a little bit, or I've heard it a little bit within the UFC betting community or anything, but David Onama was his up and coming fighter at Glory MMA, and had that fight with Nate Landwehr where he was like what, a minus 200, minus 220 favorite, and was winning the first round, had Landwehr just in a ton of danger, and then ultimately gassed out in like the beginning of the second round, might have been the end of the first round, but definitely won the first round. Goes on to lose the next two rounds, and loses as a minus 220 favorite to Nate Landwehr. And to think that, Krause might have had a lot of money on his up and coming fighter as a big favorite there, and then needing to get one back in the future. It seems like the stars could align for that to happen. Just allegedly, though. Just allegedly. But to get one back with a fighter that is on a losing streak, Derek Minner, and is probably going to get cut somewhat soon, going in with an injury, stars kind of align. You can make the story to where it would make sense. I'm not saying it's true, but all the stars align, and yeah, sketchy stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, because as you said, Ontario's not taking UFC bets. New Jersey's not taking any fights involving James Krause. So I'm just hoping we get to keep our UFC betting, because that would be not as fun to watch. But
yeah, no, for sure. And dude, I think, Dana White came out, I think it was at Madison Square Garden for UFC 281, and said, there's no proof James did anything wrong. But at the same time, if he's getting suspended from coaching, fighters are not allowed to train at his gym and then go on to compete in the UFC anymore. He's not allowed to be anywhere near the UFC. Like, something had to have gone on. They have to have something against him, because they're not just going to suspend guys for fighting under his name or training at his gym unless they've got something against him. I mean, it just wouldn't really make sense, I guess. And, James Krause apparently makes more money sports betting and running his Discord than he did coaching in the UFC. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think he comes back and tries to coach even if he lifts the suspension? Because it seems like, I know James Krause loves the UFC and he loves fighting and coaching, but if you watch his content, I think he likes betting on it even more than that. I mean, he is all about UFC bets and sports betting. I mean, his Discord was super successful. If it's $50 a month and he's got 2,000 members in there, that's that's $100,000 a month bringing in. So I don't know. It's crazy. I don't know if something's definitely going on. So, and there's got to be some kind of evidence or proof against him that he did something kind of sketchy.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think he's coaching these fighters. He's around, at weigh-ins. He's around all the fighters at weigh-ins. Gets to see everything that's going on behind the scenes, as far as fighters' weight cuts, if they're, getting taped up before, a practice or a sparring session or anything going on. Even with fighters he's not coaching, if it's at the Apex and they're all training at the PI leading the week leading up to the fight, he could see who's getting taped and everything. That's like valuable information he can use to place his bets. So, to answer your question, like, if does he just go to sports betting, just betting on UFC? I mean, he could, but like, if he's allowed back into the coaching scene and to bet, I mean, why wouldn't you, like, just to get more information about it? So, yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll say about that is the certain fight, the Derek Minner Shylan Nurdenbeke fight. We talked about it on our one of our preview shows for that fight, and we are like, Derek Minner has a decent shot here as an underdog. I put a bet on him at like plus 180, and I'm watching the fights and everything, and I'm watching the live odds, and then I look down a couple spots, and Derek Minner is now like a plus 300 underdog. I'm like, how the hell did that happen? I'm like, did I just make like the worst bet in my life at like plus 170? And lo and behold, it was suspicious betting activity. So I didn't make the worst bet ever. But yeah, that's that. We're looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yep.
But some sketchy stuff. But we'll move on to the prediction for UFC 282. Alex Morono stepping in for Santiago Ponzinibbio. He was set to fight Robbie Lawler and is now going to be fighting Alex Morono. What do you think about that one?
I don't know. It's hard to get off the Alex Morono train because starting with the Cowboy fight, he was an underdog, came in, beat Cowboy pretty easily, and from there has won, 3 in a row? It's either 3 or 4 in a row. So he's on a little bit of a tear. The guy is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I believe he coaches at a gym, or he owns a gym. So as far as fight IQ and knowledge, I mean, he's as technically sound as they come in that department. He knows so much about the sport. I think for me, it's all going to boil down to how's his cardio. It is short notice. He doesn't seem like a guy that's, getting huge in between fights, or he's not, he seems like a guy that's probably keeping himself in check. Most of the time he's not in training camp. So I don't know. Ponzinibbio, he's got a lot of knockouts on his resume. A lot of his wins, have come by knockout. He's a big, powerful guy, but, I've seen him gas a little bit in fights before. And if Morono can just weather the storm, I think Morono, with the hands is solid enough on the feet to keep it interesting. But, if he takes his back and finds a finish sometime, I don't know. I'm interested, I guess, to see what the line gets to by Saturday morning or so. I know Morono right now, what's he? He's a
like a plus 150 underdog.
Okay, I saw plus 140, I think, on DraftKings after they announced it, and
yeah,
I don't know. I could see the line kind of not, I guess, getting a little bit further apart just because of the short notice deal. It is a catch weight at 180, so it's not like he's going to be cutting a ton of weight or anything. But I don't know. It's interesting stuff. I'd like to see Morono go in there and win, but Ponzinibbio, as we've seen before, can be a savage on the feet. He's a big, strong dude. But I don't know. I just can't. I can't count out Alex Morono just from what he's done in the past 4 fights.
Yeah, if we look at Ponzinibbio, his last 4 fights: lost to Li Jingliang, a win over Miguel Baeza that doesn't age too well, lost to Jeff Neal split decision, and a loss to Michel Pereira by split decision. So a couple greasy split decisions there. Morono, 4-fight win streak, but I can't say it's against the best competition here. Donald Cerrone, David Zavada, Mickey Gall, Matt Semmelsberger. Semmelsberger's not too bad. Mickey Gall is not great. And David Zavada is out of the UFC now. Donald Cerrone retired. So it's hard to judge it. But like you said, it's hard to not take Alex Morono at plus money as well. So I'm probably going to be, throwing a unit on Alex Morono at the plus money, just because he's been so good these past 4 fights, and I think he's a little more technically sound. As you said, Ponzinibbio is pretty powerful dude, can get pretty wild, but Morono's decent at keeping his opponent at arm's length and picking his shots and decent on the ground as well. So I'm going to go with Morono stepping in on short notice. I don't think he'd take a fight that he didn't think he could win on short notice because, I mean, he just fought back in July, end of July, damn near August. So it's not like he's hurting to get in there. He's been pretty active. So something tells me he thinks he can win this fight. He is a pretty smart dude, as you said, coaches, owns a gym. So he's around the sport all the time. I don't think he'll be coming in here rusty. So give me the great white.
Yep. And I think he's tough enough too. Like I said, to just try to weather the storm, get this thing into the later rounds, and then use all your, use how technical you are to your advantage. Do some good body work, get Ponzinibbio tired, and see what happens as the fight goes on. In worst case scenario, you go to the judge's scorecard with a question mark. Maybe you get the decision, maybe you don't. But short notice fight, I mean, can't really ask for much more going in there against a savage like Ponzinibbio. So I think it's a pretty interesting fight. It's intriguing. I'm glad it got filled and we're not getting another card or another fight scratched off the card, because this card was going to be amazing. With the Yuri Prohaska and Glover rematch that gets canceled, you get Magomed Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz, and then even like some of the prelims. You got the Rosas, who's a newcomer, is only 18 years old. That's going to be a fun one. The co-main event now, Paddy the Baddy's on the card. I mean, there's still some really fun fights to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just so amazed that Rosas Jr. is getting the feature prelim at 18 years old. It's just crazy. I mean, he's getting the featured prelim over names like Chris Curtis, Joaquin Buckley, the heavyweights, Rosenstrike, Dawkins, Edmund Shabazian, who was ranked very recently, Billy Q, some pretty solid names that have been in the UFC for a while. And, Jay Perrin's not really add much to that feature prelim. So,
yeah, this is all for Rosas. I mean, there's nobody tuning in for, there's nobody. If it was anybody else, coming into the UFC, this would be first fight of the night, second fight of the night on the early prelims. But the kid moves the needle. I mean, everybody's going to tune in to watch to see what this young, 18-year-old kid has. It's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad he's super confident about it too. It's not like Chase Hooper, like, came in pretty young and he just wasn't like this confident dude or anything. But
yeah,
Rosas Jr.'s got a little chip on his shoulder and can sell a little bit more. So we'll see if he can live up to that hype. But anything else you want to say for UFC 282? This will be the last full video before then.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm going to add to UFC 282 is that as the week goes on, Raul Rosas Jr. by submission is becoming my favorite play of the week. I think he's going to go in there and look to get a big finish for his UFC debut. He's got a lot of eyes on him, and I think he's going to get it done in spectacular fashion.
Yeah, I know we said Rosas by decision on the breakdown, but I am kind of leaning towards the finish too as well. I'll say the last thing is I'm starting to feel less confident about my Duplessis pick, so I might be hedging out with a Darren Till bet since I got Duplessis at minus 120. Now he's like minus 180. Till looks pretty decent. He's in pretty good shape, so I'm starting to feel less confident about it. Might hedge out and just take a little bit of profit there. So, yeah, that's it. Hey Jive picks on all the media. Want my full card? It's all on the medias there. At the parlay for you, and at the double leg for the show on all medias, TikTok and Instagram. If you're watching here on YouTube, please leave a like, a subscription, and a comment down below. Till then, enjoy the fights this weekend. We out.